Hello and welcome to your one-stop for vehicle repair, restoration, and everything automotive. This is Bird's Garage. So today on Bird's Garage, we got a 92 Mustang project car back in the shop, and we're going to upgrade the electrical system. You know, these cars had a very low amperage output from the factory, and they can't support all the modern things you want to do with one of these Fox body projects. Electric cooling fan, add a subwoofer from the trunk, which we already have. We've got some other accessories installed on the car that we're actually at about its charging max. Another problem we have in the car is at idle with the lights on. The lights actually dim a little bit, so that means we're just at its max for our charging capacity. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to change some of the wiring, which you got to do with this project, and we're also going to upgrade the alternator to a much higher output. So right now we're going to get started, we're going to jump under the hood, I'm going to show you what we're working with. Okay, so what we currently have installed, we have what's called a 2G alternator in the industry, probably put in every Ford vehicle in the early 90s. It only has a 75 amp capacity, so it's not enough to do what we currently have going on and then what we want to do in the future. Most people will put what's called a 3G alternator in, and that's out of like a 95 to 2000, I think, Mustang. And that has a much higher average capacity, and it actually will bolt right in here. But you have to grind the bracket to make it fit, and I don't want to recognize powder coating. So what we're going to do for our project is we're going to go with a 6G alternator. A 6G alternator is a much better improvement than the 3G. It's actually got a smaller body. We'll bolt right into this bracket, so I don't have to grind anything. And that has a much higher capacity than the 3G. The one we're going to go with, we got this brand new Motorcraft, and it has a 200 amp capacity. So this would be an excellent option for our project. So right now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start disconnecting the battery and tearing all this apart and see how the new one fits. Okay, so this is our old 2G alternator and this is our new 6G. From doing some quick measurements, it looks like they're going to bolt right into that bracket. I'm going to try it here in a second. One other nice thing about the 6G alternator is that it has an internal fan. It doesn't have this ugly external fan that our 2G does. So I'm going to put this on the bracket and see where we go from there. Okay, just as I calculated, this 6G alternator is going to fit directly into this bracket. It's not going to touch anywhere. We don't have to make any modifications. The only slight difference is that on the 2G alternator, this is threaded here into this aluminum boss, and this has no thread. So we're just going to have to put a through bolt with a nut on it. And we're going to get all this into the car right now. Tighten its new bracket. That's probably the easier part of the job. The next part of the job is the dreaded electrical. Now, I love doing electrical work. A lot of people don't, but I'm going to walk you through some of the processes now to how to change this over. It's not just a sheer fact that the O+ won't match up to the new alternator. You can't have the same wiring in place to feed the electrical system in back because it's just too small now because we're putting so much amperage out. So there's specific reasons for that, and I'm going to walk you over here and we're going to go through them right now. Okay, so I wanted to walk you over here. I want to give you a little quick overview of why we just can't change the alternator and leave the wiring alone. So in this case, we're going to talk about conductors of electricity, and in this case, we're actually going to reference a copper wire. So this is our wire here, and remember it has very small strands of all kinds of small pieces of copper on the inside. Well, at the rate at which these electrons flow through this conductor is actually called amperage, which can reference as A, or it can be referenced in I, if you're going to use Ohm's law. The definition of amperage is 6.25 times a billion per 1 point of this conductor per second. Now, as current flows through a conductor, it meets resistance. And the resistance is very dependent on a couple of major things that we're talking about with our reference with our project. The first is the cross-sectional area. So the smaller the cross-sectional area, the more resistance is going to overcome. Also, the length of the conductor. So looking at the length here, as our length gets longer, our resistance is going to increase. And the byproduct of resistance is heat. So if you go with the smaller diameter like that and keep that wire in place, you can actually start a fire because you're going to build up so much resistance, you're going to build up so much heat, you're going to end up frying that little wire. This is our wire that we cut out of our car here, and again, I think it's like a 12 gauge, it's really small, so you can start running 200 amps in through this wire, and you're going to fry it. So this is why we got to change and we've got to upgrade our B+ wire to a much larger gauge of wire. We can rate all this to Ohm's law, which is voltage equals the amperage times the resistance at which it overcomes. So one is always dependent on the other. So the amperage, or I, is equal to V over R, the voltage, the available voltage over the resistance in the circuit, and then the resistance is actually dependent on the voltage over the amps. So they all have a direct relationship on another. Think about if you have a bulb that's kind of dim in your car, and typically then there's a problem with the circuit somewhere. There's this break in the small break in the wire, still a little current to go through, or the resistance then is somewhere affected. And typically like that, it's like a dirty ground. So if you apply to the formula of Ohm's law, you think about the increase in resistance in that circuit, it's going to decrease the available amperage it's going to have to go into that bulb. So a lot of times, like when I experience working on cars that were in accidents and they have dim lighting in the car, it's because the car was fixed structurally and repainted, and when it was, they have a dirty ground somewhere, or the ground was painted or something like that. So just one example. Think also example your battery cables. Your battery cables are a very large diameter, and typically they have a good amount of length to them. So to be able to start your car, you need hundreds of amps in a typical gauge engine. You need a little less than that with a smaller engine. But try to run all that through, again, our small diameter here. If you were to put this up as you'd had this as a battery cable, and you try to put hundreds of amps through here, you'd fry this wire. And I actually have that happen to me once, where some of the battery cables, the ground has a very large diameter wire, and it's got this smaller diameter to go to another ground portion of the circuit, but it's not part of the starting system. Well, I was trying to start a car one time, and it wouldn't start, but I had a smoke coming out from under the hood. And when I looked under the hood, I actually saw that this wire was fried because there was a break in the battery cable ground wire somewhere in the length of it. And when that happened, this wire actually was trying to serve as the ground for the starting circuit to start the car. So again, it's really important. This is why you got to change the wiring. Don't leave the wiring in place if you're going to do this kind of upgrade, because you're going to fry something and probably start a fire in your car. So with that then, and out of the way, let's jump back to our car and start working on our alternator wiring. So referencing everything I just said, these are our current feed wires, that are called B+ usually on a schematic. And these would go from our alternator and feed our electrical system. You can see the diameters here. These are just way too small to support a potential 200 amps that this alternator could put out. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to run a new wire. And we're going to do that with this kit we got from PA Performance. Now this is a brand new wire that's going to have enough length that what we need to run from our alternator over to our main feed area junction that goes and feeds the entire electrical system. This is a 4-gauge wire, and it's also got a nice fuse on it as well. And this is perfect for what we need for this job, and it's going to more than satisfy the demands of the new alternator we just put into the car. So in this particular Fox Body Mustang, these wires all go through this harness in here. They go all the way along the radiator, they go under the battery, and then they all go to this main post in the center of the starter solenoid, and that's what feeds the entire electrical system, is on that post. So what a lot of people do, so they disconnected that starter solenoid post, and then they get all the wires they need out of that harness and put it back together. And I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect it from the starter post, and I'm actually going to just wrap it over here. And I'm just going to put it away for now, because if we ever want to add some more accessories, especially if we want to add fog lamps, or even this would be a great feed wire if we want to add electric cooling fans, because we could have a nice main hot wire that's already run that's going to go right to our relay and then go into the fans. So here I'm cutting away all the insulation. I want to unwrap and expose all these wires, get a better plan for what I need to do for wiring to the new alternator. So these two wires on the plug actually go into one, and this is the one that I referenced. I'm just going to cut this back, and I'm going to tie it into the frame here, and just leave it for later use. And then these other wires, we don't need, of course, this plug because it won't fit into this new alternator. We're actually not going to need a wire or 2. I have to look at the wiring diagram, I don't remember. So I'm just going to cut this out and all this away, and I'm going to disconnect this wire from that main post and start running our new alternator feed wire. The wire in question is this third one right here. If you're not sure about it, you can always check it with the meter, make sure you got the right wire. So as you can see here, I just kind of laid my new alternator feed wire down roughly where I want it to go. It's not going to be final yet, but I think I'm going to run it here along where the old B+ wire is. Now I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with this Mega Fuse mounting box. I think I'm going to mount it directly under the battery tray here. That should be a good location to keep it away from moisture and any other crap that might get into the engine compartment. If you see here, I finally got my Mega Fuse and holder mounted. What I ended up doing is this bolt right here is an already existing bolt. It holds the power steering cooler lines in place in this bracket, so I ended up just utilizing that bolt. I drilled a new hole and installed a bolt in here. Now I'm going to swing the wire up where it's supposed to be in position, tighten this down, and we're done down over here. This came out really nice. We're going to secure the wire up at the top where we need to go, and then we're going to see where we have to run those little wires. Before I started this project, I went to the junkyard and I pulled out this alternator harness from an 03 Mustang V6 car for only $5. So right now I'm just taking it all apart and just getting what I need so we can move forward to the next phase of this project. Okay, so I actually have a service manual for both a 92 Mustang and an 01 Mustang, which are what these harnesses are both from, so we can lay out these circuits, look at them better together. Okay, so I've been studying both service manuals, and typical Ford, you know, even though these cars are a 9-year difference, they actually use the same color for the same circuits on these two plugs. So the yellow is the A circuit, that just senses the battery voltage, and then the I is the green wire, and that turns on the voltage regulator. Now, with these new style 6G alternator we're going to, we don't need this S circuit, but there is a resistor in here that I'm going to have to carry over to the green wire, because that, you read here that you check for the instrument cluster and will turn off the voltage light. I'm afraid if I don't have this half a watt, or actually it's a 420 ohm resistor that's in here, so I'm afraid if I don't have that in there, the light's not going to turn off on our car. Because of the harness that I took apart, the one I got out of the junkyard, I don't see any type of resistor in that harness anywhere, so they probably do it in the dash in a newer car. So that's the only critical thing I think we got to do here. Otherwise, just going to go ahead and match yellow what's in the car and green what's in the car. Now we are going to have to cut that main old feed wire off from that solderless terminal end that goes onto the starter solenoid, because that actually connects at the end. It's got a fusible link here, and it actually connects that main feed wire, and it connects this yellow wire. So we're not going to use that feed wire right now, so we're just going to go ahead and cut it off. For safety reasons, I don't want to leave the other end hot when we're not going to use it. So when I teach automotive electronics at the local community college, I always relate things back to car stereo systems, because students almost always have some sort of experience putting in speakers or a head unit or amplifier or something like that. So that also relates to one of the most often questions I get asked about troubleshooting. They ask me, well, my speakers go out sometimes, what do you think it is? Sometimes the power goes out in my radio, what do you think it is? Well, I always ask this question, and almost the always answer is no. I always ask them, did you solder the wires? And they say no, we just twist them together, put some tape around it, did some kind of, bad way to repair the wires or put them together. And I swear by soldering, you have to solder all wires, you're going to put them together. We're going to do it on this job. I do it on every job, electrical job that I do. So right now I'm going to show you the proper way to solder wires and install them into the car. So first thing we need to do is we need to get a lot of this insulation off so we can twist the wires together. And since a lot of people go like this, it's actually the wrong way to do it. It's hard to wrap the wires back up, and since our wire travel in our car is going to be like this, we want to put them together like at a parallel like this. Like that. Now I like to solder on a block of wood It's an insulator, the heat won't go into it, and I have a lot of blocks of wood I use soldering with, because something like this too is really small. It's good if you want to put it up into the dash if you're doing some wiring up there. So the trick is you got to leave the soldering gun onto the copper and just let the heat do the work, and then once you get it hot enough, you can just put the solder on and it should just start melting. Now I don't know how many times I've seen students and other people, they don't put it on long enough, it gets on all gobby, or they put the solder on here and then try to put it on the wire, and it doesn't work, it's not effective. So I'm going to go ahead and solder these wires now. Again, you got to be patient with it as well. Now we have our resistor in here, and I have this on a low setting because I don't want to get too much heat into this wire. I don't know if I'm going to damage the resistor. I doubt I would, but I don't know how that's connected to. It could be some solder in there, and I don't want to get too much heat and break the connection. So in this case then, I'm just going to, hopefully a low setting is going to be good enough for this. I'm just going to hold it down and wait a little bit and be patient. I'm just going to dab the solder onto the copper. All right, enough time has passed so I can try it. It's still a little too cold yet. Again, I'm using a low setting. It might be a little too low. I'm just worried about that resistor. If I had a higher watt setting, you'd see it would just flow right away. So it's just flowing onto the copper. That's what you want. Again, it took about a minute and a half. You just got to be really patient. But this is the most effective way to make a wire connection. And long lasting. It's a little gobbled up than I like it, but again, it's on the low setting, so I just worried about the resistor. Now it's a little cold on the bottom. Again, it's because I am using the low setting. So I'm going to just put a little bit on the bottom here and be done. And the wire doesn't feel too hot. Looks pretty good. It's a little gobbled up than I'd like it to, but that'll work. And the wire doesn't feel too hot, which was my concern. Okay, we can't stop there. That's only half of the job. We got to go ahead and put some sort of protection over that connection so we have a long-lasting weatherproof seal. Now you can use electrical tape, that's fine. I like to use shrink wrap when possible. Once you put this on and you put a little heat on it, it uniformly wraps around that wire and the connection, and it will create a watertight seal, and that's what I'm going to do with this job here. Okay, I got a little ahead of myself earlier. I should have put some smaller diameter shrink wrap over in here, and then I could have, after I soldered, just slide it down. Now it won't fit over this area, so I'm going to use a little bit bigger one. Should be okay. So I'm just going to put it over the repair, and I'm going to use a little heat out of this butane torch, and that's how I'm going to melt it. You can use a lighter, you can use the end of the soldering gun, whatever works for you. Just be careful, don't burn the wire. Just like so, and you see it conform around the wire. Again, don't put the heat too much in there, it'll melt it. Just like that. That's almost perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and once I start sizing this for the car, I got to cut some of the wires down that are already in the car. And I'm going to solder the ends on there into the car and we'll be done. So in this case, I'm going to make sure now I put my shrink wrap on first. Don't you be careful with the shrink wrap too. Actually, if it is just a hair larger than the wire and you heat the wire up to put the solder on, you can actually shrink that and it won't fit over the connection. But these are plenty long enough, just going to pull it way down. Going to match the wires up, solder them, and we're almost done with this job. Don't have too much more to do. Doing my thicker wire here, I cranked the wattage up to 40 instead of 20. So just to be sure, before I put the shrink wrap on, I want to check the resistance in this wire and make sure I didn't damage that little resistor in there. And you can see Yeah, it's about, I got a wire in here, it's going to have a little more resistance in it, but yeah, it's very close. But I didn't break continuity, so the resistor's okay. I'm going to put the rest of it together. That looks really good. Now I got to go ahead and try to find some wire loom. I'm going to wrap all this in wire loom, make the final connections, and we're done. So here I'm cutting and tucking away that old B+ wire that we don't need anymore, but we're going to reuse later on sometime. See this little rubber protector boot here? I actually recycled that from the harness I took out of the '03 Mustang. Make sure to secure the wire all the way with zip ties. Don't just leave the wire hanging loose. Now this is all the final product. I tucked everything nice away, and it looks like nothing's even been installed. It's all factory, which is what the look that I wanted. All buttoned up. I'm going to start the vehicle and make sure it's charging. I'm going to use my digital volt meter. I should be above 13.5, probably between 13.5, 14.5 volts, and I know I'm charging. Okay, so that's going to wrap up another fantastic show. I hope you learned a lot and enough maybe you want to tackle this job yourself. So as always, thanks for watching. Good luck with your projects, and remember, it's not a rewarding day unless you get dirty. Thank you.